Behold, my glorious supporter Lordrusty has asked what all the point is in playing any video. No, I'm just kidding. Rusty is asking about Genshin Impact and how and to what degree and why and whether I recommend people play it. You said you have a few friends that have noticed you playing it because I got you into it because you were watching me play it, and I've talked about that a lot on streams, but you want a video version of that. This was a little hard. What I've tried to do is write a lot of notes, and I'm going to tell you how I'm going to cover things in what order, and hopefully we'll get you through it in a timely manner. So I think there are basically three things to talk about here. Gacha, what a game with a gachapon monetization strategy is, and then some positive things about Genshin Impact, why you'd even care about this, and then I'll explain the negative things, some advice, and the pity system and the banners and all the rolling stuff once you've decided that you're actually interested in the thing I'm describing. So just very quickly before we start, because I'm going to have to use this word a lot, gacha stands for gachapon. It just refers to a style of microtransaction. It's based on those capsule toy machines. You know, you turn the crank, you put in a quarter, you get a thing. It's basically gambling. It means you're going to roll the dice to see if you get the character you want, you know, not literally dice, but the game will take your money or your free cash up currency. We'll get to that. And then it's going to spit out some characters. Now, Genshin Impact is defined by its gacha economy. You can't just ignore it, but it is also a game defined by the way in which it gives you control over that. You might be thinking, well, surely if there's a gachapon system in a game, it has to be pay to win. You pay to get the characters randomly. It's not just pay to win, you also have to gamble to win, right? That's not true, but it's complicated why that isn't true. So we're going to get there, but you need to know that going in. That is the thing we're going to talk about. So now we're going to talk about positive stuff, things that I think are reasons why you maybe should play the game, or what I think it's good at. If it's good for you, then this will probably be why. And then talk about some negative stuff, some things that if this clash with you, I probably wouldn't play it. Some things that I think are not great, but it's fine, you should just know about them. Then we'll explain the banner system for rolling for characters, pity, all those ways you can control that gachapon economy that I said were really important but kind of complicated. And then I'll give some advice. If you are at the end of the video and you decide you are going to play it, here's what I would and wouldn't do. Cool. Let's begin. So positive things. The biggest thing for me is that I think that this game has a phenomenal build crafting structure for a few reasons. And what's great is that it's core to the game's structure. Now, games that have a gacha in them tend to have good build craft because the players won't want new characters if they're not going to be useful to them. This means that the game has an incentive to make it so somehow or other you don't always want to use the same characters. There are a lot of ways you could do that. And Genshin Impact does it in a really clever way that isn't very obtrusive. It's very natural. It's pretty organic. That's the elemental combat system. So every character has an element, and enemies may occasionally be immune or punish one element. But this creates a system where the game isn't about which thing works, it's about which one thing doesn't work. So rather than being a game where this one option is what counters stuff, it's more like this one option is the only thing that doesn't counter this, and you can use whatever else you like. That's generally how the game is structured, which creates a system where you naturally want to use different characters, but provided that you have a few that are working, the game isn't going to constantly tell you, no, you can't use that. You can have a character you really like and use them, 90% of the time, and it will just very occasionally be that the game will want to switch it up, which can be very organic, very healthy, really resist burnout in some way. It can be a very positive aspect of the game, but of course it was conceived partially so that you have a reason that you would actually get use out of a new character that is available to roll for, and we'll get to that later, but relevant to bring up. The reason I think this is a positive is because it means that will always be true of the game. They won't change that because it's a core part of the monetization strategy as well. It's interesting because games with a gachapon economy in them, it's theoretically this really bad thing, but it could, like many things in game design, potentially force a game to remain with good design, provided that it's treated the right way, that developers understand it and try to do something good with it instead. And I think they did here. This is a game with a lot of different levels of challenge, many different types of restrictions or no restrictions at all on what you can do. Different levels of challenge, fighting in the open world, fighting bosses, fighting in Spiral Abyss, which is a sort of higher level dungeon that switches up every couple of weeks, and events. A lot of the events treat the combat model differently. Sometimes there are events where it's mostly about the elemental reactions, combining your pyro with your electro to create overloaded to knock enemies away or stagger larger enemies, combining hydro and cryo to freeze enemies in place so they don't move around. There was an event where those didn't do damage, but you could still do the reaction and use it for utility. That was pretty interesting. There were events where you didn't do the damage, but something else did, so you'd set up the reaction, and then the game mechanic would be the trigger and do the actual damage, and then you'd set up, cryo and then fire pyro at it, and that would melt it and do bonus damage, stuff like that, which is really interesting. There are different contexts for things being good. There's lots of different opportunities for things to be powerful. In the open world, it often rains or you're fighting near water, so there's naturally available hydro to react off of. Maybe you electrocharged with it by adding electro to it, and then that stuns enemies and does damage, and you get chain lightning in the rain, and your electro character just pops off when it randomly rains. Or it's sunny, and you set the grass on fire with a pyro character, and then parry off of the damage that the grass is doing to your other character that has this powerful parry ability. Stuff like that. Enemies often are holding pyro, or there's pyro present in the environment as well, which can be a really interesting aspect of combat. And that's not an element at all when you're in domains or dungeons and Spiral Abyss. Generally there's, well, not at all, but it's much less common. Generally those are very clean combat arenas for you to do the thing, so your build can perform the function, that just have various restrictions, countering certain kinds of enemies or not, just overpowering them. It can be an interesting choice. And the game usually does a good job of providing a large variety of those difficulty levels and demands upon you. There's lots of reasons to use lots of different kinds of stuff, and a lot of different things are good. To wit, as a game with a gachapon, it benefits from having developers that understand design really well, and I think that these developers do, relatively speaking. The characters in the game are relatively well balanced. It's not perfect. There are some reactions, electro at the moment, that are maybe a little weaker across the board, but they're not bad. They're just maybe a little worse, with the caveat that they're completely different, which means they're usually good in the situation where they have synergy. For example, I had a real breakthrough in my time playing Genshin Impact where I realized that overloaded causes enemies to stagger if they're larger. Overloaded normally knocks small enemies away. That's not usually good. You want them there so you can kill them. Grouping enemies together is good. Knocking them apart, generally not, in most games. But larger enemies, it looks like it does nothing at first, but if you bombard them with overloaded, with pyro and electro reacting, eventually they stagger, and so you can kind of go toe-to-toe with them instead of them just super armoring through your attacks. You can manage to actually stagger them, which is pretty interesting if you make a team designed to do that. It's cool. It's not the only way to fight them at all, but that's nice. And partially because of that system, because the developers had the good insight to make the things do different stuff, rather than having everything be just another way to get damage, they have different utility. That's really good. It creates this situation where it's not as difficult as it would otherwise be to make every character good in some way, provided you want what the character is good at. There really aren't any characters that are just bad, and even the very few that are not usually very good, I do think there are a few, maybe two characters like that there's really no way that they're that great. Even then, there are some situations where they're amazing, and that will only get better with time, and as the game probably eventually starts buffing characters. Gacha games, or games with gacha in them, I don't think this is a gacha game. It's not only that. There are games that are kind of only that, but are also notable because most laws in most countries prevent nerfing things in a game with a gacha. You gambled for the thing, they can't then pull the rug out from under you and nerf it. Not directly anyway. So it's possible that the game won't be like this forever, but you'd see it coming very far off if they just started power creeping stuff. Eventually the roster would get taken over by power creeped things, but if they just make a few characters that are a little more powerful, it's not a big deal because they'll usually be available either for a limited time or they're just that one element, and then that's not going to be the be-all end-all all the time. And the developers have had this really good mindset where a lot of the time when they develop a 5-star character, the rarer and limited time characters usually, those characters are kind of a sort of enhanced reinterpretation of a 4-star character, which might sound bad, but because they have a different niche and yet they are generally similar to an easier to acquire character, they basically never change the game. They don't change the face of the game. There's a corollary at a lower rarity that essentially does something similar. This isn't always completely true, but it's true enough that that has been the case for the game's lifespan so far, and there's good reason to believe the design will continue that way. So, relatively knowledgeable developers when it comes to game design. Lots of the characters are powerful in different ways, and that's fun if you're interested in that. Again, if you're not, maybe it isn't, but it is also a game where, you know, every character can be an attacker if you like them. This is a game where if you really fall in love with a character, you can make it work. It might not be ideal, but even the characters that are really bad at doing damage, they're relatively bad. They're not actually numerically so far behind as you might think. They can do it. It's just kind of like, why? And if your reason is I want to, you can. That's fine. It's much more about intelligently combining characters on your team. This would never be a game where you'd be able to pay to get the rarer characters and then you just overpower the content in the game. That just can't. It's pretty much useless without elemental reactions most of the time, or at least intelligently combining characters with abilities in a certain way. Even the strongest characters that don't rely on a reaction with another element to be powerful generally need a character of that element as backup to charge them up so they can do their full damage potential, which means that a single or even a few characters that are just way too strong have a surprisingly small impact on the game's balance. This is a game that I think will have pretty enduring game design. It's good now, and it will probably get better without also getting worse in a different way. It's a game with a very good core. The structure of the combat loop is solid, just from a design perspective. One last thing about the build craft, which is something I'm really excited about. I have a lot of stuff to say about. If you're watching me, you're probably interested in that, so I hope you don't mind, is that it's got a pretty elegant build system. There aren't a ton of different pieces of gear. You can see at a glance what a build is. I can tell you extremely quickly off the top of my head what a character I'm playing has on their build. My Kaya is using the flute with 4-piece Blizzard Strayer. The build is attack percent, cryo damage percent, and crit damage. Done. That's the build. I use him with other Hydro characters to freeze stuff, and that's how he does his damage. He gets his crit chance from cryo resonance and the Blizzard Strayer effect and his Constellation 1 ability. Pretty simple. And it's a great game in that because the multipliers are relatively few, you got your attack, you got your damage percent, you got your crits, sometimes elemental mastery, and because there are very few pieces of gear, when you change something in a build, you really notice, you really see, you think, oh wow, I really see how my energy recharge is much better now because I changed one piece of gear that has that stat. I think that's pretty fulfilling. And critically, it creates a situation where basic intuitive builds where you want damage and you build damage, you want healing and you build healing, are good, are close to being kind of optimal. And yet intelligently made builds also have room to exist and be better, but not so outlandishly stronger that you can't play the game or win at the game, succeed at the game, without making a build like that most of the time, which I think is a great balance. It's just a really, really nice balance. As a final point about this, I want to go back to the point about the gacha. You know, the question for this kind of game is, games that have a sort of gachapon economy have an incentive to make a lot of viable characters. The question, though, is how attainable a large, diverse roster of characters is, and in Genshin Impact, that is attainable. And I'll talk about that more later. You'll have to take my word for it for just this second. I think that's a positive thing. I think this game has a symbiotic relationship with its gacha. It's a bad thing, objectively, because exploiting people's gambling is not good, but this game makes the best of it and does something that ultimately does benefit the game as well, using that structure. Cool. There's other good stuff besides the build craft. I just really like that. I think it's really elegant. I think a lot of people won't even think of it as a build in the way that a lot of people talk about builds, but I do think it's quite nice. It's well done, as I've explained. It's got a pretty dense open world if you go to the areas that the game wants you to be in. There are very sparse parts of the open world, but there's no reason you'd be there, so you won't notice those unless you are the kind of person who actively goes seeking for the corners of the world. If you're trying to break out of the map or something, yeah, those parts of the game don't look good. There's not stuff there. Just don't do that. Just play in the parts that the game invites you through. And I think it really does. And it does a good job kind of pulling you off the beaten path and surprising you with stuff. And there are surprises and quests that appear out of the environment, and you're on a treasure hunt all of a sudden, and that's fun. The game does a good job of that. It has this kind of environmental puzzle thing that a good amount of the environment does, where there'll be this environment or a little valley, and there's this puzzle, this large scale puzzle outdoors. That's pretty interesting. The game has some of those that I thought were interesting and nice, and if you like that kind of thing, you might enjoy them. It has some Legend of Zelda DNA. Let's not try to hide it. Everybody knows that. Yeah, other good stuff. It's free, and there is a lot of story. I do think that the story greatly increases in quality over time. Like, the beginning is the worst part for me, but I don't think it's like terrible. I do think this game's writing is above average, but nothing special. It's not cringeworthy and insufferable, but it isn't like good. I wouldn't view it as a strength of the game, like the writing or the translation, but not bad. And it does cover, it's creative. It just, technically, I don't think it's like beautiful writing or screenwriting, if you want to say it that way. Subjectively, I think Genshin Impact is rather pretty. I think it's a nice world. There are parts of the game that I walked to and thought, wow, that is pretty. Like, that is, I just stopped and looked, which I think is a good sign for an open world game. It is a game with a healthy amount of updates, provided that you don't try to only play it. I don't know why people ever do that. If you play any game and no other, it's going to be bad. So don't do that for Genshin Impact. You'll hear people complain about virtually everything I just said, but I want you to think about whether you think that thing sounds good, not whether somebody else does. I want you to think about whether you think it's good. I don't want you to think that I'm trying to say that anything except the overall buildcraft is objectively good. I'm not really trying to argue that. I'm just saying I think these can be strengths of the game if you want them, and that's why I would play it. If that stuff sounds good to you, I would keep watching this video. If it doesn't, I probably wouldn't. If it doesn't sound meaningful to you, I don't know if I would do that. A quick note that doesn't really fit anywhere else in the video on this kind of topic. One thing Genshin Impact doesn't really do that I don't view as a bad thing, but you might, is if you want to main a character, that's not a thing in this game. I mean, you can do it. There are characters that reward you for keeping them in play for a long time, longer than you normally would, but the combat loop revolves around, the entire game revolves around the idea that you have a four character team, and you swap between them to get value. Maybe you have a primary attacker and then 3 supportive characters, a healer, another character of that element to supplement their damage, and then maybe like someone to enable them to do a reaction or to buff them in some way. Or maybe you have 4 characters that all have powerful short cooldown skills, and you kind of rotate through them. Or maybe you have 2 primary attackers that both kind of need to charge up or have a cooldown on their thing, and you swap between them while the other 2 characters support. But having one character that just stays in play and you basically never swap to the other characters is not ever effective. There is no situation where that is a thing that the game will reward you for doing. You can't really play any of the meaningfully hard parts of the game by doing that. You can do something sort of close with a few characters, but if that's something you like, I mean, I don't view this as a negative thing, because I think Genshin Impact will disabuse you of that notion. I think you'll play it and think, I don't want to only play literally one character. It's just a game where it's not that kind of game. If that's something, if you don't like managing at least a few, like 2 or 4 characters, this you have to. Basically, I don't think that's a bad thing. If you're worried about that, I'd just try it, and if you hate it, like, it's fine, it's free. But you might as well save yourself some time if you're married to that idea. If you find yourself saying, I main like this character in a game that does have a lot of options, you're allowed to in that game. You're not so much enabled to in this game. So I don't know. I just think that's relevant. Okay, so if you're still on board, what's the problem? You know, that sounds great, a lot of people say. The thing I just said is maybe a negative is a great positive for a lot of people. That combat loop of switching between the characters in your party, buffing yourself with Noelle and then swapping to Kaya, and you keep the shield, and then you put some cryo on enemies, swap to your traveler, swirl that to nearby enemies, swap to Barbara, freeze all those enemies. Like, that's cool. That's one of the best things about the game, I would argue. If you don't want that, that's one thing, but I think a lot of people, that's a major draw. So what's the problem? Why aren't we playing this game right now? Your guess is as good as mine, but let's continue. Some caveats. The biggest one is gambling. This part's going to move a lot quicker because there's not much to say about these. It's obviously bad to have a game with an exploitative, morally questionable economy where you try to push people's buttons and get them to gamble so that they spend a lot of money, and that's how the game sustains itself. There is, you could argue, a moral quandary. You shouldn't play this game because it's morally wrong to support this game. I disagree. This game doesn't care what you feel about that. 95% of the population doesn't care what you feel about that. So you not playing will do nothing to affect whether this game succeeds. It's irrelevant. That's a philosophy. You can disagree. For my part, I influence people on the internet, so I'm going to play this game because you are going to play it anyway. And me informing people about this game makes it safer, makes it a more potentially wholesome, positive thing rather than an exploitative thing that is intentionally confusing. I think as someone who can inform people about games, this is actually a fairly important game to like review pretty thoroughly if that was what someone was doing for work, because you can make this game a lot, it's kind of weird to say it this way, but safer if you describe the way it's working more thoroughly, if you understand what it's doing more thoroughly. So that's part of the reason I'm putting so much effort into this. But yeah, that's for you to decide. If you have a gambling addiction or a sensitivity or a similar experience, you shouldn't play this game. You should, at the very least, you should respect this game. That's all I'm trying to say. It is trying to push your buttons. At the end of the day, it can be, the developers can put as many caveats into the fact that it's gambling as they want, but the publishers are trying to get you to gamble and take your money. So you need to know that going in. Right. Finally, or secondly, but it is the final major negative thing, this is a game that really revolves around daily playtime. You don't have to play for a particularly meaningful amount of time every day. You don't have to play every day, but you get such an inordinately large amount of the value that the game gives you by playing for like 5 or 10 minutes every day that if you can't or won't, that would be a major roadblock for me. If you only even touch the game on the weekends, that's tough. I would say if you could at least just do dailies every day, if you want to do that. Again, it's not about whether you can. If you can but you don't want to, this is not a good game for you. But yeah, that I do think it's relevant to mention how slow your progress would be relatively if you only played on like Saturday and Sunday. That would really slow you down in Genshin Impact. It's really assuming that you're going to play it a little every day, or at least manage your resources over the course of the week in some way. And if you don't do that, it really slows down the game's progression. I'm also going to come back to that when I talk about the Battle Pass. Finally, it is an ongoing game, so it does sort of have this moving goalpost problem. I don't think this is an issue, but you might let me explain. This is a game, an open world game, a game with a lot of different characters and builds, and it gets updates steadily. And so it is a game where you need to make your own goals, but at the same time, the meaning of those goals or the form of those goals take will be recontextualized every so often. Right now, I own every 4-star character in Genshin Impact, which is pretty doable without paying a meaningful amount of money. I have not paid no money for the game, but I haven't paid a particularly meaningful amount. I am a so-called dolphin. I'm a cheap-to-play player of the game, and being not a whale, but a dolphin, I have found it not that hard to get pretty much every 4-star character in the game, and most of the 5-star characters I've wanted without much fuss by, planning. I'll talk about that later. But yeah, I'm a kind of player where I want to plan it out. I want to make a build for all those characters. And right now, with the gear that's in the game, I have that. As of only a few weeks ago, I have kind of what I want on pretty much every character. But in a few months, they will add new gear items. I'm excited about that, but you might not be. You might feel like it has this MMO RPG kind of thing where your progress was invalidated because they made some new hotness. Now, they've added artifact sets, gear sets to the game before, since launch, and they didn't invalidate what was there before, but there were characters where it was an upgrade for them, because subjectively it was good for a specific approach to that character, and you might mind that. You might mind that the game just kind of goes in a different direction. I do think that ongoing games are a double-edged sword. It doesn't just mean more stuff. It means that the game it doesn't stay the way you maybe like it. I don't think that's a problem for Genshin Impact, but I think you should think about whether you want a game that has that quality. Again, my whole shtick here is I think people should think about this topic every time they pick up a game, and I really feel they don't. And so I would just encourage you to consider whether you actually want an ongoing game or whether you would rather play a game that stays the way it is. That's the major stuff. There is some minor stuff. These kind of fall into the category of I'm lukewarm on them, or you might have a big problem with them, or I just want you to know about them. The voiceover. So most of you, the game will default to its English voiceover, but it has a Japanese, Chinese, and Korean voiceover. I am not in the majority when I say this, but there are plenty of other people that feel this way. I despise the English voiceover. I don't think it's the voice actors. I don't think they're bad at it. I think it's the director or the marketing team or the translation team or probably all of them. They're just telling them to do something that doesn't work. It's obnoxious to me. And I'll be honest, I booted up the game and 5 minutes in I said, this is not going to work for me. I despise all of these characters. And I swapped it to Japanese. I loved it and I never looked back. Anna, my girlfriend, plays in Korean, and I think that has sounded pretty good as well. I did briefly play with the Japanese dub on, and I also thought that was pretty nice. They're more mature. That's all it is. I speak English, so it is obscuring some of the maybe more edgy parts of the game. That's a factor, but I don't think it's a huge thing. I think the big thing is the English voice actors were told to act immature. I swear they were. If you listen to both, you'll think that too. I strongly recommend at least trying the game in Japanese. Just try it. And if you like it better in English or you don't mind it, you don't care, fine. But don't drop the game because of the language. At least give it a go in this other one, because a lot of voice actors and voice directors and stuff have put a lot of effort into this, just not the English voice director, or I'm sure they put effort into it, but they're doing something that is grating to me, just infuriating in some way. So please try that. Totally different issue. The value from the battle pass. I mentioned this earlier with the whole daily issue. This is a game, and many free-to-play games are this way, where if you don't want to pay a single cent into the game, it's actually arguably kind of bad, because they have something that kind of gets you in the door financially that has crazy value for money. In Genshin Impact, it's a battle pass. If you get the battle pass, you get so much money, so many level up materials, and it's so easy to complete, provided that you are already playing the game in the way that it rewards you for playing, which is a little bit every day. It doesn't really take effort to complete it, provided that you're already playing in the way the game is compatible with. There might be the occasional player. I have a couple of regular audience members on Twitch that are the rare player, I think the rare player, that they do play frequently, but just not quite in the way that makes you just kind of automatically get the battle pass. But I think for most of you, if you are a good fit for the game, the battle pass is basically free to complete, and you'll get all the rewards on it effortlessly. They'll just happen. I don't think that's a big deal, and it doesn't cost very much. It massively increases your progression in the game. I think you should think much more at that point about whether it's worth your time to play the game, rather than whether it's worth $10 every month and a half for your entertainment. It is. It's just a matter of whether you're enjoying that entertainment, right? You have the internet. You have a device that can do the thing. $10 is not relevant if that's your entertainment. The question is whether you want that entertainment. So I would think more about that. Personally, I think this is a non-issue, but some people insist on the game being 100% free to play, and it is. You can play it that way, but you will be rewarded for building out a few characters. We'll talk about that more later. There you go. I think that's relevant. Kind of on a related note, whaling. If you're really rich or you want to occasionally splurge in a healthy way that you can afford on a game like this, you should know that this kind of game in general, usually if you pay a lot of money, you get shockingly little. There's a card, is what it's called. You pay, you know, $5 a month and you get daily cash up currency. That's very efficient. You'll experience this thing where your friend will buy the card and then you'll pay like $100 and you will get a shockingly similar thing for those two investments. Your friend will just have to wait a month. So yeah, just don't. I mean, that's what I've been saying this whole time. Assume you can't buy the cash up currency because it's almost worthless. That you get so little for such an insane amount of money. I don't think I've ever seen a game that gives you so little for so much money. Simultaneously, I've never seen a game that gives you so much for so little money, which is very weird. If you pay $15 a month, you get the card. That's a little less than that. You get the card and the battle pass. You get a ton of stuff and you will want for nothing, provided that you're not greedy and you manage your resources intelligently. But if you were to then suddenly splurge because you like the game and pay $100, you hardly get anything else, which is a really weird place to be. Now, I'm not really sure where this should go in the video either, but I think it's relevant. Finally, again, a totally different note, co-op. Co-op is advertised, but it isn't the focus of the game. You can't play the story parts of the game co-op. You can do a lot of other things co-op. You can fight world bosses and do domains and stuff. You can do a lot of things co-op, but it's not a game where it would be a lot of effort for no benefit if you played like a ton of the game co-op, if you focused on co-op gameplay. So I wouldn't think of it that way. If you have friends that play, or even if you just have the internet connection, you're going to use co-op sometimes. Yeah, like you have a hard domain, you play it on co-op. That a lot of people do that in the middle of their time playing to get, you know, artifacts that they're having trouble doing the thing with. Co-op is a useful tool, but not for most people a meaningful focus of the game. It could as well be gone most of the time for most types of players. Now, Lordrusty and friends, in your particular case, I think this is a good thing, because if you had a coordinated group of 2 or 4 people, co-op in Genshin Impact is pretty interesting. I won't get into this too much now, but you normally have a team of 4 characters, and you have one on the field at once, and you swap between them. You know, they can buff each other, but you only have one out at once. When you play co-op in Genshin Impact, instead, that team splits. Now, you and I each have a team of 2 characters that we can swap back and forth between, and in exchange for not being able to swap between 4, only 2, we now have 2 of them on the field at once, one controlled by each of us. Does that make sense? And if you play with 4 people, then you can have 4 characters out simultaneously. You just can't swap. I do think there's a sweet spot, and I think it's 2 and 2. I think having 2 players and they each control 2 characters that they swap between is the sweet spot, and having 4 is not ideal. There aren't a lot of characters in Genshin Impact that you actually want to keep out all the time, that you really gain anything from benefiting, because of course they're designed so you swap through them. You could make a team like that though, a team where you have a character, a player using maybe one of the life-stealy characters that heals your whole group, so they do decent damage and they're going to be attacked constantly, so they'll top everybody off all the time, you're never going to die. Then you have a supportive character that has some way to do damage while their support thing is down. Off the top of my head, I can think of one. And then you maybe have 2 primary attackers that synergize in some way and have a really dense kit. They have stuff to do all the time, in other words. They probably shouldn't use stamina, for example. There's buildcraft there that's actually pretty interesting, but not accessible to like almost anyone. So I wouldn't focus on that. And you don't get much out of exploring the open world in a group unless you just want to. I'm not saying it's not part of the game, but I would view it as a helpful tool, or if you're a very specific group of people, maybe actually a really awesome separate thing that is totally unique to you and has pretty much nothing to do with the normal game. But anyway, I hope that's fun for all of you. I think in general, it's good advice to consider it a non-entity most of the time, and then something you use to get through a hard domain when you get stuck. Okay, so now that we've gotten through all that stuff, I'm going to sit back down because we got to talk about the gacha. And this means you've gotten far enough that I haven't told you something that's caused you to give up on playing this game. Okay, that's nice. That's good. I hope you properly evaluated that. And you're excited about it. The stuff you want to do, you just want to understand. You understood me when I said, yeah, you got to treat it with respect. It's trying to get at you and push your buttons, and you say, okay, got it. I'm ready to fight back or exploit that. How do you do it? What do you do? How does it work? So the gacha, when you go to the menu, you'll see some banners. The banners are basically machines, gachapon machines that you can put your quarter in and turn the crank on. Does that make sense? So there are, by default, 3 kinds of machines at any given time. There's the character banner, or the character machine, the weapon banner, or the weapon machine, and the standard banner, or the standard machine. These are important to keep in mind because they work differently. Like they have different pools of stuff in them. You can't get the same thing on all of them. They have different relationships to pity. You can spend different currencies on them. So I will explain them briefly now. The standard banner is just everything. If there's anything that's for a limited time, unless otherwise stated, it's not available on the standard banner. So this is the worst one because it gives you basically no control. You want all the control you can get, and the other banners will have rate ups. That is, for a limited time, you can get a certain thing or you're guaranteed a certain thing after a certain number of rolls, which you want. You want any control you can get. So the standard banner is the worst banner in that sense. But there is a currency you get, these little blue balls, they're called acquaint fates, that you can only roll on the standard banner. You might as well just go ahead and roll those. There's no reason to save them. Really, you don't gain anything you won't be able to use them anywhere else. Just go ahead and use them there. So I would use those there. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter. We'll come back to actually rolling a little bit later, but that's the standard banner. Don't spend resources you can't spend anywhere else there, but the game does give you a resource that you can only spend there, so spend it. There's really no reason not to. But I wouldn't spend any primo gems, which is the sort of universal quarter. I wouldn't put any of those in that machine, as it were. Now we'll go to the character banner. So this is kind of like the standard banner, but you can't get any 5-star weapons. You can only get 5-star characters, which is good, and I'll talk about why in a second. And the other caveat is that this will have rate ups. So at any given time, there'll be a character banner, and it will have 3 characters on rate up that are 4 stars. I'll talk about what that means in a sec. And 1 character on rate up that's a 5-star. Because Genshin Impact has something called pity, meaning you can't fail to get a rare thing unlimited times, you're eventually just guaranteed one, you will eventually just get the 5-star character. Yes, there is a way that this game lets you literally just straight up get, guaranteed, the thing pictured on one of the banners. But the character banner's 5-star character is the only one. The standard banner doesn't have rate ups, and the weapon banner has 2 5-star rate ups. So the only time that you are guaranteed a set thing in the gacha is when you roll on the standard, the character banner, and it's that rate up 5-star. Eventually, you just have to get them. You're just guaranteed to get them. Not because of probability, the game just guarantees that you get them after a certain number of pulls. Again, we'll talk about that later, but that's the main reason it's good. It gives you more control. Characters are also just better than weapons. Guns don't kill people. I kill people with guns. It's a meme, but it's true. The good characters in Genshin Impact are always very good with bad weapons, but good weapons are sometimes not that good, even if you have good characters, if they don't fit the weapon's niche. Some weapons are very narrow. Furthermore, again, like the free-to-play weapons just are pretty good. There are a lot of good, powerful weapons that are basically free or low rarity. There are 3-star weapons, but no 3-star characters, for example. So that creates a situation where you would much rather invest your very limited resources, because you're not whaling on the game, into the character banner. Now, again, if you're filthy rich, then you can just ignore me, but I don't know why you would think that it's good advice to say don't ever roll on the weapon banner. I will briefly talk about why. On the weapon banner, you can only get 5-star weapons, not 5-star characters. That might be fine, but there are 2 5-star weapons on rate up, so you kind of lose the main benefit of a rate up, which is that you eventually get guaranteed the pictured thing. The 4-star weapons on rate up at any given time, there's also more of them. There are 5 instead of 3 characters on the character banner. That's also less control. It's just way less control, and it's always going to be worse for you than the character banner unless you are filthy, filthy rich. So just ignore it, pretend it does not exist. I would literally never roll on the weapon banner, roll only acquaint feints on the standard banner, and roll everything else on the character banner. But how? Roll it how? Well, I mentioned earlier that there are basically 3 forms of control that you have over the game, and I'll describe those now. So they're pity, the guaranteed characters that you can get besides the rate up characters, and the ability to see into the future. So first, pity. Pity is the most important one and the most complicated. This basically means the game gives you a guarantee that if you don't get the rate up things, after a little while, you'll just be guaranteed to get them. So it works like a coin flip and then a guarantee. If there's a rate up 5-star character, the game gives you a number of rolls you need to do before you get to get the pity. The game will take pity on you after that. So 90 rolls into the character banner, the game flips a coin. If you win the flip, you get the rate up character, period. If you lose the flip, you're back to 90 rolls until you get the pity again, but this time you don't flip a coin, you just get the character. This means that if you roll 180 times on the character banner, you are 100% guaranteed to get the rate up 5-star character. Now that's a lot of rolls. What you need to know is that there is a kind of soft pity, as it's called. And this means that you don't actually need to roll 90 times to get there. Around 70, 75 rolls, there is a very, very strong corollary that people have gathered data about this that shows that the probability greatly increases. So you're much more likely to get the character in between 70 and 80 rolls rather than 90, which means the total number of rolls is really more like 140 or maybe a little less, because that after 140 you have a lot of time to have actually gotten lucky. The critical detail here, though, is that pity is pretty much the only way you get the 5-star characters because the game's rate is very low. The chance of getting one of those characters is quite small. It's like 0.5, I think it's 0.6%. In other words, almost 1 out of 200, which is crazy. That's insanely low. This is actually good in a way that we'll talk about in a second. But the thing you need to know for now is that when you roll on a banner, they have a pity system that guarantees you eventually the things that are on rate up. For 4-star things, I said there are multiple 4-star characters or weapons in the weapon banner on rate up. So how does that work? It's the same way. Once you roll enough times, for 4 stars it's 10 times, much smaller, the game flips a coin. If you lose the flip, you get a 4-star thing, but not one of the rate up ones. If you win the flip, you get one of the rate up ones. You're never guaranteed any individual one of them, but on the character banner, there are only 3 4-stars on rate up, so that's not too bad since it's only 10 rolls. And then again, if you lose the flip, you're guaranteed next time. So maybe I'll roll 10 times, flip a coin, I lose the flip and don't get a rate up character. I roll 10 times, again, I'm now guaranteed one of the 3 rate up characters and I get one. Then I roll 10 more times, I flip a coin, I win the flip, so I get one of the 3 rate up characters, again at random. It goes like that, you just keep going. So you are generally very likely, if you try to go for the 5-star on a banner, to get the 3 4-stars on that banner as well. Although the odds are actually a little against you. It is a little bit rarer to get the 3 4-stars, all 3 of them, if you don't have them, compared to getting the 1 5-star without pity, which is just something you should know. I'm not going to get too much into the probability, and it's complicated, of course, because they're pretty different things, but that's the general way to think of it, is you would expect to get like maybe 2 of the rate up 4-stars on your way to getting the rate up 5-star, perhaps. And that's just a general way to think about it. You save like 70 to 90 rolls for a banner. So number 2, the guaranteed things. You don't always have to roll for something. So this is good because it means you don't have to gamble sometimes. You get a currency when you roll that you can spend in the shop for just a guaranteed 4-star character. There'll be 2 available every month, and they rotate, and you could just buy them. You know, you need to roll a fair amount. You won't always be able to buy them every single time if you roll a normal amount, but you will be able to fill out your roster that way. And pretty reliably, characters that are new 4-stars will be available in that shop in a couple of months. So you will likely not need to worry about gambling for all those 4-stars. You will generally, historically, be able to pick them up guaranteed. You'll just have to wait a little bit. No big deal. And this is connected to this future point about Future Sight. This is a game where knowing what's coming can give you a unique edge if you combine all this information. So we've already established that you get this pity thing where you can roll a bunch in a banner, and then after a while, you're just guaranteed something. We also know that if you miss one of the 4-star characters, which you're not specifically guaranteed, unlike that 5-star character, you will usually be able to buy them or get them through an event or something guaranteed. So you don't need to worry about always getting every single one of those characters. You can then combine this information with news, data mining, to look ahead, and you can often know about 3 months in advance, oh, this character I want is coming. So I'll want pity ready. I'll want to have kind of charged up my pity counter so that I can get them. Combining all of this information, you can now basically build your own banners, because you remember how I said there are 3 kinds of machines? The character banner, the weapon banner, and the standard banner. Well, the pity counter is on the machine, not on the specific combination of characters on rate up. In other words, let's say that 5-star character A and 4-star characters A, B, and C are currently on rate up in the character machine. In 3 weeks, they'll rotate, and 5-star character B, as well as 4-star characters D, E, and F, will then be on rate up instead. However, the pity counter on that machine doesn't change between those 2 things. So let's say that I want 4-star characters A, B, and C that are available right now, but I would like 5-star character B, which will be available when it rotates. I can roll, say, 60 times on the machine now, build up my pity counter to 60. I'm virtually guaranteed to not get the rate up 5-star that is currently pictured, because I don't have pity, and the rates are so low without pity that I'm not very likely, after so many rolls it adds up, but it's still like less than a 30% chance that you'll get that character if you average up the probability that way. And that's also kind of a gambler's fallacy thing. Then, after getting A, B, and C 4-star characters that I wanted, I can just wait till it rotates. I don't want 4-star characters D, E, and F, but I don't need to get very many of them, because I've charged up my pity. I can get 5-star character B with only 10 or 20 rolls, because I'll hit pity. And I was fairly likely to be able to build up pity without getting the character I wanted, again, because the rates are so low without pity. You actually have a lot of control there. It would almost be better if the game literally ensured you didn't get a character without pity, because it would give you more control over this. You only very rarely get lucky, in other words. And when you use this method, it's actually kind of unlucky to get a character not on pity, because then you have less control. Using that method, you can pretty easily roll whatever 4-star characters you want within reason, and then just wait for the 5-star character you want, roll like once and get them, and then charge up your pity on whatever 4-star banner you like, 4 stars on whatever banner you like. And in that manner, pretty handily acquire whatever characters you would enjoy. I've been doing this for the entire time Genshin Impact's been out, and it's been like 90% successful. There's been like one disaster where I got the 5-star rate up character on like roll 20 on my way to pity, and even then it's like, well, you got a rare character for very few rolls. It's not even that bad when it fails, which is nice. Of course, sometimes there's a little variance because you don't know whether you're going to win that first coin flip. You plan to roll 60 times and then roll 20 or 30 more to get your 5-star, but then you flip a coin and lose the coin flip. So unexpectedly-ish, you need, like 70 more rolls or something. But you can, of course, plan for that. If you just save the currency for about 70 rolls, this means that it doesn't matter whether you win the coin flip. It will even out, provided that you keep that buffer there. Now, that's not easy. That will take time, but you're not going to be rolling all over the place right when you start. I think that's enough of an explanation to equip you to use the banners to your advantage and control the randomness the game allows you to control. And if you want, largely get the characters that you desire, provided you don't want like every character. Let's finish up with some new player tips. There'll just be a few things here. I think if you've made it this far, you'll hopefully have a happy, healthy relationship with this game, but yeah, take it slow. Don't blast through everything in the game. There's a ton of quests and story to play through, but then you'll be done, and then there won't be any more. There is a lot of stuff in the game, and you shouldn't feel like you need to tackle it all at once. The combat loop isn't going to be very demanding for a while. A lot of players experience sort of a difficulty spike in the mid-game. Maybe they're like level 50, level 40 on average. They're working through the Spiral Abyss corridor, the bottom part of that. They're doing domains to try to get artifacts. There may be adventure rank like 25-ish, 35. A lot of people have a little bit of trouble around there. Use co-op to clear domains. Ask for help if you need it. Try to focus on a few characters. This is a good tip overall. Don't focus on literally one character to be your primary attacker, but don't focus on too many either. I would recommend kind of two, I guess, and then maybe make sure to beef up at least one healer and some kind of character to group enemies together if you have them, or a character that does damage in an area, but only very infrequently. Definitely a supportive character is worth investing in. That damage will serve you well when you need it, but I would focus on maybe two. Pick two primary attacking characters that you like, that give some benefit for staying on the field and continuing to attack, while you occasionally swap to your other characters for support. Pick some characters that feel good when you play them that way, and invest in those. You do get Noelle currently for free as a new player. Well, you get given, it's like the rolling tutorial, and you end up getting her for free, guaranteed. And she's pretty good for a lot of stuff. She's a very good sort of anchor unit to be a mainstay of your party if you like her. But a lot of characters can. I mentioned earlier how one strength of this game is that pretty much any character can serve as a primary attacker if you insist. It's just a matter of, if you want to pick a powerful one, you got to think about what they're doing that's better than someone else, rather than just whether they can. Everybody can. That's not a benefit of a character. It's like, what do they do that's unique? And pick one you like. Don't worry about it being the right one. If you want advice, I'm sure there's loads of that everywhere. I'll give you some, fine. But generally, I would think of the game as the least valuable thing a character can do is be a primary attacker. If they can give you a lot of value by being on the field for a very short time, that's really good. That's far better than them being an attacker. Generally, I would build every single character in the entire game to be on the field for as little time as possible, and then when you can't do that, the characters you're left with, use those as your primary attackers, because it's a dime a dozen. You could use any character for that. You shouldn't be like excited for a character to be, you don't need more of those. You only need a few, and then that's it. Having some of each element is nice, but that will take a while. That can be difficult. Focus on making your characters give their value, generate their value. So I think that's useful. Kind of on the same note of investing your resources, be careful with your billets. You're going to get things called prototype, yada yada, type of weapon, polearm or whatever, billet. These seem like a more abundant resource than they are, or at least they did to me and a lot of new players when the game first came out. They do drop from weekly bosses, but they don't drop very often. So personally, I would recommend saving them until you get a while along in the game, and then choose very carefully which weapon to craft with them. I'd also highly recommend not crafting a duplicate of a weapon with them. You can combine duplicates of weapons to make their abilities stronger, but it's a pretty marginal benefit. I would really rather have the option to get an entirely new weapon than to strengthen that one weapon. There are some exceptions. It's something we could talk about more on a stream sometime or whatever, but yeah, I'm not trying to advertise you to come watch me necessarily. I hope that helps. If you do it, I'm glad it's helped Lordrusty here. But at the time of recording this, I'm taking a break from streaming in June, so it's not even. But in July, I'll be back if you want to. Yeah, I think that's most of it. For rolling, yeah, I just wanted to say, go ahead and roll any Acquaint Fates on the standard banner, totally ignore the weapon banner, and then manage the character banner, as I mentioned, keeping in mind that the pity carries over between iterations of that banner. Anything called the character banner saves your pity. A couple more notes about the rolls. Each banner has its own pity. So the standard banner has an independent pity counter. It does have that, if you roll 90 times, it will give you a 5-star. It doesn't have rate ups, so you have no idea what 5-star, which makes it way less valuable, of course. But you will eventually get guaranteed a 5-star character from that. I'm telling you this both because steadily building up rolls there is good, but also so you don't think you got lucky all of a sudden off of it. No, that was just eventually guaranteed. The weapon banner also has its own third independent pity counter. Again, that doesn't change whether you should roll on it. You might as well know. That's why rolling on the standard banner with your Acquaint Fates that can only be used there is harmless, because it doesn't affect the pity manipulation you're doing on the character banner. Finally, the game kind of acts like it says every 10 rolls you blah, 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 blah. You can roll once at a time or 10 times at once. They're the same. There's no difference. There's not Pity counts up either way. The every 10 rolls thing is just describing 4-star pity. It's not a separate benefit for rolling 10 times in a row. The only reason to roll 10 times at once is to make it faster. In a perfect world, there is only disadvantage to rolling 10 times. It's just really slow to roll one at a time. So if you know you're going to roll a bunch of times anyway, I'm rolling for 4-star characters on the character banner, and I know, I want any of these 3 characters, and I would want at least 2 copies of each of them. You can go ahead and roll 50 times in a row, because that's not going to happen in all likelihood. It's pretty safe. You're very unlikely to waste rolls. But yeah, ideally I'd roll once at a time. I think that's pretty much it. It was almost an hour too. Damn. Complicated, but I hope that I described it in a helpful way. Thank you for listening. Thanks for asking, Lordrusty. It was a very good question. I hope this was a comprehensive guide, but as they say, if I'd had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. Unfortunately, this is the best that I can do without a lot of editing and production value and painstaking script writing, although I did write pretty extensive show notes for this video, which I will now free myself of. Thanks for asking. I hope that you have fun with this game. Please feel free to ask any questions you have that you felt like I didn't cover. Goodbye and good night. Good morning or good afternoon, whichever applies to you.